This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels with Carli-louan Foster for the first time. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
So we want to mention we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So if you use coupon code GHOST, you get 1 month free premium subscription, so you can stop scrolling and start listening. We will be on Newsly later today. And wanted to let people know this is episode 883 of the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast, and we're happy to be on the air for this amount of time. If I can get that back up there. And what we're going to focus on tonight or today is the title here that we're going to pop up right now is how to finally overcome emotional eating for good, even if you've been struggling for years. So with that introduction, how would you like to start? Because you're a life coach and nutritional therapist. And maybe we can kind of talk about your background.
So I actually have a background as a chartered accountant, and I spent a good chunk of my earlier career as a finance director, and then I decided to retrain as a nutritional therapist. But one of the things when I started working with a lot of my clients, I found that a common thing that was coming up and was sabotaging particularly clients who had a weight loss goal was around emotional eating. And so all of the work I was doing around sort of nutrition was fantastic, but people needed something to help them on a much deeper level around dealing with emotional eating. So I then went on to train in coaching, in neuralistic programming, emotional freedom technique, and hypnotherapy, so that I could really support clients at a much deeper transformational level with some of these underlying behaviors that were impacting the results that they wanted to get.
So maybe you can talk about the details of the three things like nutritional therapy, EFT, and NLP. And well, another thing is hypnotherapy. I don't know which one you want to start with first. Maybe yeah.
So nutritional therapy is really about looking and supporting the body at a holistic, it takes a very holistic functional medicine approach. So we're not just looking at symptoms in isolation, we're looking at all of the processes in the body and what's going on, and working to sort of optimize those processes with food and in some cases supplements if required. So not all the time we'd be going with supplements, but sometimes you just can't get all of the therapeutic doses that you need from food. So a lot of clients do need some nutrition support. When they have weight loss goals, often there's other stuff going on around sort of balancing blood sugar levels. There might be hormone issues if they're particularly stressed. So often it's never just one thing. So the nutrition just helps us really sort of target different physiological processes that might also be kind of running alongside sort of other issues around emotional eating. Then in terms of emotional freedom technique, this is something I discovered about 10 years ago now when I had really bad anxiety because I was learning to drive in my 30s. And it really helped me just calm my nerves. Familiar with it. It's also known as tapping, and you tap on different acupressure points, and it just helps free up places in the body. So it works very similar to sort of acupuncture and acupressure, but you're just kind of tapping on different points across the body as you say certain phrases and scripts, and it can just be very calming, and it just comes from a place of, as well as sort of really loving and accepting yourself. Even though you have this problem, I still sort of deeply, completely love and accept myself. And then you kind of switch to sort of more positive affirmations as you continue tapping different points in the body. So a really key one is experiencing sort of stress and anxiety. And then in terms of NLP, again, this was something that I really wanted to incorporate in my work with clients because I've personally found it so transformational in my own sort of journey. And it really helped me sort of gain control around and manage around my emotional state. And I think when it comes to emotional eating, learning how to manage your emotions in a different way is absolutely crucial to sort of overcoming some of the struggles that people experience around food. And I speak both from a professional capacity in all of this as well as a personal one. I actually suffered with chronic stress for probably 11, 12 years. I felt I kind of was a classic yo-yo dieter. I made all of the weight loss mistakes, felt like I would always be someone who struggled around food, out of control with food. And I really used food and, if I'm completely honest, alcohol as well to sort of, help me cope with my day-to-day stresses. And I just felt in this constant state of overwhelm. So all of the things that I've trained in have been pivotal in my own journey in terms of overcoming that, as well as sort of, like I said, working with clients as well. And then hypnotherapy, again, is another one. I think a lot of this stuff that comes up with emotional eating, we often learn from quite an early age that food is a quick, reliable, effective way to quickly change our emotional state and give us that release of feelings and make us feel better in that moment. And so through repeated behavior over and over again, we get this ingrained and programmed, hardwired into our brains. And so it's often operating at a deep subconscious level. And so hypnotherapy and also another technique called timeline therapy can really help sort of work at this at a very deep subconscious level, where a lot of this stuff and beliefs around that we kind of carry around with us about who we are and how we feel about food really sit.
Yeah, I know I'm a type 2 diabetic, and as a child, a comfort food is like my mom used to bake. And then she taught me to bake, and then it was always like, okay, well, these cookies and the cakes and the pies, well, they make me feel like comfort. But as a diabetic, you can't really have those, right? It's not good for you. Like, you have to learn how to do something else, because all that sugar is comfortable. But if you're type 1, type 2 diabetic, you can't really comfort yourself with sugar. It becomes very dangerous to do that. And so it becomes something that you learn to find other things. I'm a musician, so I got into music.
Mm-hmm.
But then you find, well, as a musician, you can get into repetitive, injuries. Like, you can get into carpal tunnel, because then you get crazy about, oh, I'm going to practice all the time. So
Yeah.
it's a matter of balance. You have to find a way to balance. And as I'm 55 now, and when you're in your 20s and stuff, it's hard to balance, because people are always like, well, I can just exercise forever, I can practice forever, I can drink whatever I want. So I guess it's just a matter of, your clients, are there people that had a lot of child or younger issues like that were beginning in childhood, and then they have to try to unlearn those things as an adult?
Yeah, I think a lot of us pick up beliefs, and our identity is very much shaped between sort of 2 and 8. And, it might be just a very small remark that somebody makes in your childhood that can really shape how you see yourself. I had a client who started gaining weight at the age of 8, and that's really shaped how she's always felt overweight. That's such an integral part of her identity now. And sort of, those experiences that she had back then have really shaped how she sees herself, her self-perception, her self-worth. And we need to kind of go back and work on, reprogramming some of these beliefs behind it, because she can't remember a time when she didn't feel overweight or uncomfortable in her own skin. And so you start to create this belief then around, well, I'm always going to be like this, or it's not possible for me. I don't think I can really achieve that, because you don't have any kind of evidence or experience of anything else. And so if you've got that kind of deep-seated belief behind a lot of all of the other stuff that's going on, then that's going to shape your results. So this is why I think doing the deeper work to kind of get into some of this at, at the subconscious, at the kind of, almost unaware stage, is really important to kind of start shifting people away from these behaviors that are just not serving them.
It seems like a lot of things that you're teaching people. I've had a lot of interviews with therapists, and it's always been like the individuals have their own kind of glass ceiling. Individuals like, what I can't do, what they're kind of stuck in a lane because they just can't believe it. Like I've run into musicians like, well, I can't get beyond this because that's where I am. And it's like, well, you have to kind of transform, and it's hard to transform if you don't believe it. Like I say, if you don't believe in yourself, then how are you going to get anybody to believe in you? And as a point, as a producer, you're trying to get musicians to do something maybe they're not comfortable with, because in order to get to the next level, you have to challenge yourself. And most people like to stay in the comfort zone, even if it's negative, even if it's something that's not allowing them to progress. It's just more comfortable, like a comfort food, to just stay eating those potato chips or eating those cookies, or like doing the same thing over and over. Like, so how do you get people to realize that they can overcome their fears?
Yeah, I think you mentioned some really important stuff there, because our brain wants to keep us safe, and that's one of the primary functions of our brain. So when we sort of program some of this behavior into our brain, it almost becomes like, well, I need to emotionally eat to survive, which doesn't sound logical, but because we've programmed it into that sort of survival brain part, it that operates on emotions and associations, it becomes hardwired. And so it can be very difficult just to think your way out of this stuff very logically, because you're working with part of the brain that doesn't sort of operate on that basis. So one of the things that I think I often see with clients is they kind of get stuck in this sort of cycle of they're emotionally eating, it's impacting the results that they want, which is typically a weight loss goal. So they look for a diet, an exercise program, maybe they get a personal trainer, and they go through this period of restriction and being very perhaps controlling around what they're eating, how they're exercising. And then it leads to sort of this all or nothing approach. There'll be a trigger emotionally, maybe it's some stress at work, a big, event or something comes up. They kind of have a slip or, eat something that they shouldn't or they feel is bad. Then they get that kind of mentality where it goes, well, I've messed up now, so I might as well just kind of, throw it all out the window, have a full blowout. Leads to all sorts of guilt, shame, feelings like that. And then it's kind of back into the restriction. And so they feel like they're failing, like they can't stick to anything. And, all of this starts to impact self-worth and self-confidence. And, that's where we get into what you've just been talking about, where they don't think it's possible for them because they can't stick to anything. All of the evidence says, because they've been kind of going round and round in this kind of binge and restrict cycle, that they can't do it. And so I think the first step really is to just understand that actually you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that actually you've picked up some programming that isn't working for you. And it's then possible to sort of work on uninstalling that program that's just not going particularly well. And how do we reinstall programs that are really going to support your goals and create this sort of new sense of identity, these new beliefs? So that's the first step. I think the second step is also just becoming aware of the feelings that are coming up, the thoughts that are creating these feelings when you're kind of going into sort of this emotional eating behavior. And then, like I said, we start to work on how do we uninstall this program. And typically I find hypnotherapy, so that we're working on that kind of deeper subconscious level, can be really beneficial. And there's another sort of NLP, sort of hypnotherapy type technique called timeline therapy, which really works on removing negative emotions, limiting decisions and beliefs that we all hold that from our past. We release those, and then we can also look at how do we create our future. So they're really powerful techniques that can really transform how this kind of underlying patterns, behaviors, identity, beliefs, all of this other stuff that's sitting underneath what's going on with emotional eating. Because emotional eating is often triggered by sort of stress, overwhelm, boredom, but underneath those behaviors is often sort of perfectionism, overthinking, worry, anxiety, not feeling good enough, all of this other stuff. So if you're not working on those behaviors and emotions and things going on at that sort of deeper level, then it's going to be difficult for people to sort of shift and overcome emotional eating, because you're not really getting to the root cause of it.
That's really interesting, because a lot of stuff I do as a musician and a producer is I tend to try to drive into people's creative self less than their logical self. Because the problem I have with some musicians is they let their logic self come in, and it kind of corrupts the creative process. Because what happens is, if you go and you get into like a perfection mode, then you start to judge everything, and then you say, well, I can't release this, and I can't do this, and I can't do this. It becomes tons of can'ts. In terms of, if you're creative, I kind of like trust yourself, because you've been a musician for 15, 20 years. Like, you got to trust yourself, right? Just put it down and let it, you're a natural musician, let it happen. And there's one thing, like Elton John said back in the day during the Yellow Brick Road, they would just put down the third take. They would do it live, write the song that day, and not keep on going back over and over 100 times. Like today, people will go over things 100 times, 1,000 times, try to make it perfect, correct every note. It gets so anesthetic that it loses all the feel. It loses all the heart. And then you don't even know like what you originally were trying to do. The original intent of what you were trying to create gets wiped out, because you were trying to spend all time trying to be perfect. And I think in life, people do that, and they say, well, they're scared of failing. But like, as a musician, almost everything you do, it fails, right? Like most of your stuff doesn't work. But you learn from it. If you think about you're failing, you'll just stop. But if you realize that's actually part of your growth, is to fail. And I'm a software designer too. And what we do is, we make mistakes. We keep on correcting the software. We keep on uploading the new version. So we have to realize that it's evolutionary, and it like we don't worry about it. It's like you get version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. You keep on progressing.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful way to look at it. And I think I really like the way that you've just described that, actually. And yeah, I might steal that and use it with my clients.
It's okay.
Because yeah, I do think, particularly when you're talking about the musical process, it is that kind of process. The process is so special, not just the end output as well, and the journey that you've kind of taken to get there. And I think that also, particularly when you have a weight loss goal, people don't appreciate the journey and enjoy the process, and they put too much pressure on themselves in the process, a bit like what you're talking about as well with music or with software. And yeah, perfectionism, particularly around dieting, is so common, and feeling like you have to do everything perfectly in terms of exercise, in terms of the food that you're putting in your mouth, and you can't possibly eat anything bad. Where actually, if we all just kind of relaxed a little bit and just kind of used it as a feedback process, oh, well, actually, I've checked this week and, you know, maybe I've not lost any weight. Okay, let me just kind of look back rationally. Where do I think I could have done better? Or, you know, perhaps I could, you know, change this. And then, you know, just kind of letting go of all that pressure that you put on yourself, I think is really important.
Yeah, because the whole process of like, okay, it's an all or nothing thing is always kind of, I always have to work against that with people because, like, you know, somebody, they have a tendency to want to wipe out the whole recording. And I'm like, don't do that because everything you've been working on for the last week or month, don't go and erase it. Go back and like think about it artistically and say, hey, we can salvage this, we can work on this, we can change this. And a lot of times in art, the happy accidents or the mistakes or the micro timing errors are actually part of the art. They're part of the thing. And if you go and you wipe it out and say, I got to start all over again, it's not a positive thing because a lot of times you're wiping out like the integral part of how you're going to progress.
Mm.
And it's hard, you know, I think it kind of equates to with somebody saying, I messed up. I went and had a bunch of junk food and now I got to start all over again, or I'm going to go have just go crazy and then have to start all over again. Like, I think that's a mistake when people do that. And I've seen people do that with art. And I've kind of been as a producer, like, please don't do that.
Yeah. It is one of the big things, I think, kind of retraining people in terms of not kind of letting it snowball and turn into a whole big thing, and kind of just letting go and being comfortable. Sometimes, you know, life happens, things get in the way, something will always come up, but it's trusting yourself. And I loved that you talked about trust in that process as well. Learning to trust yourself with food is a huge one for a lot of people dealing with emotional eating, because one of the things that, yes, we do all this work around beliefs and identity, reprogramming that mind, but often I find that people have kind of lost touch with their body. They've lost touch with, you know, when they're hungry, when they're not hungry, how their body feels, what their body needs. And it can be, you know, when we do this work, without someone, you know, without these rules that they've been carrying around what they should and shouldn't be eating, from sort of diet culture, without someone kind of telling them what to do, or without tracking, particularly, you know, whether it's calories or macros, they can be a bit like they've lost that sense of how they can eat for themselves to nourish their body and feel good. And so we still need to do that work, which is why, again, the nutrition side of things really comes back in, because often I find that people have just become so disconnected and so kind of consumed with diet culture that actually, you know, they've just got no idea what works for them anymore in terms of food.
Also, it seems like there's a balance because, again, because when I'm at work with a lot of my tech people, right, they get stuck in this thing where they're in the cube, right? They're in their cubicle. They gotta get measured by how long you stay in the cubicle, how long you stay at your desk, and then when you do that, well, you don't probably eat right because you're gonna stay at your desk for 4 or 6 hours straight. You're probably gonna eat nothing but junk food. You're gonna eat things that aren't gonna help you, right? And then you're gonna get depressed because, like, you're not realizing that. Like, eventually, what I point out to a lot of guys is like, sitting there for 6 hours straight isn't actually showing that you can do it. Like, if you just walk away and take a break, go for a walk, go do some Tai Chi, go do something else, your mind has a habit of actually kind of clearing a little bit. And then you go back to it and see that, you know, you were too narrowly focused on something, and now you need to kind of see the big picture. If you just stay there in that state, that's not helping you eat right, and it's
Mm.
not helping you focus, and you think it is, but it doesn't. It's like you need to actually walk away and do something else and then come back. And what do you think about that type of problem that people have when they kind of get measured by how long they stay on something?
Yeah, I think on the whole, it's a shame that a lot of sort of work culture, office culture doesn't really always, you know, support healthy habits and behavior. And like you say, it's not good from a productivity point of view to be just sitting there for hours and focusing, particularly if you're not kind of, fueling your body right. It's good to get up and move and walk around and just get some fresh air, reset and refocus. So I think some cultures are sort of starting to shift in how they see this, and being a lot more sort of health focused, a lot more mental health focused, but it's still, I don't think, not enough, because that kind of hustle and grind culture and, like work hard mentality is still prevalent in so many different industries and areas still. So you might get a few kind of, like, tends to be in sort of the big tech firms that I used to work in. They were quite progressive in terms of, like where they were in their sort of health and wellness programs. But most companies are just not like that, and most small
Not
companies
into it.
really
No,
not.
because the executives, they actually have systems that are measuring how many keystrokes people are doing and
Yeah, it's
actually
crazy.
check in to see if you're actually at your desk, and then kind
Yeah.
of give you a ding if you're not, without thinking that a creative person's outside the bell curve, right? That the
Mm,
creative person, sometimes you can't measure that. The measurement of being at that desk is actually not the correct measure whether or not they're going to be successful.
no.
But then you want to have something that goes on your spreadsheet, and that's what you think it is. And that's the problem, is like the boardroom's got the wrong metrics. And I think a lot of people have the wrong metrics when it comes to stuff too, because I think like there's a certain point in time where like you're going to get diminishing returns from doing the same thing, and you think you're doing better, and it's like you're not. You're like,
Yeah.
there's only so many hours of practice. A lot of jazz guys would say, you know what, practicing for hours and hours isn't going to do it, because what we do is fusion, and you have to kind of be able to think on your feet, and you
Mm,
can't really prepare for that other than kind of actually listen. You have to listen to everybody else. You have to be present. You can't be just like thinking about what you're going to do. You got to look at the whole big picture, and that's a different way of thinking. Because somebody might think, oh, I got to keep on practicing. No, you got to actually interact.
yeah.
You,
I do think we're overwhelmed in our culture in so many different ways by this. What we're talking about here is more equals better, and it really doesn't, in so many different areas like you've touched upon there. And certainly, like in when it comes to weight loss, actually more restriction is definitely not better. More exercise is not better. More sleep probably is better to a certain extent, but it's probably one
that's
of the
always
few
better.
exceptions to the rule. But yeah, we've just got this whole idea of, more equals better. So if we do more work, push harder, we're going to get better results. And actually, I think we need to start shifting that mindset and mentality to sort of the right actions in the right frequency at the right time in the right way, in a balanced way, is probably where we kind of want to end up.
It's interesting about frequencies, because I'm into sound design, and what we do as the musicians is we, over time, you start to learn what frequencies actually connect to the audience, right? What tones, like in terms of sound waves, like sine waves and square waves and cosine waves. You start to learn that certain combinations of waveforms and rhythms actually get the audience to interact. And if you can hit those frequencies, you actually can get people to respond. And then if you realize, like, I'm a Buddhist and I chant, and the same kind of frequencies can help me calm myself when I'm doing like my Lotus Sutra and I do my chanting. it's like there's something about the way sound works, and I'm wondering, like, in your hypnotherapy, what aspects of sound do you use to kind of understand how it actually affects you?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely obviously different way, like to generate different brainwave frequencies. You can use different sounds to switch your brain, whether it's alpha, theta, and they'll have kind of different relaxing, calming effects on the brain, but also sort of, switching, your subconscious mind is very open on certain brain frequencies. So it's really interesting that you're talking about sound waves, and it's definitely something that I'd like to know more about in terms of how you sort of evoke. I think it's really interesting how you sort of evoke emotions or feelings through sound and music.
Yeah, just because a lot of what I do is I actually have hardware synthesizers that can take a waveform and start from scratch and create the tone. And then what you can do is, like, over time, when you're doing that sound design, you can evoke emotions. Because, like, what happens with music is sound creates like a sound painting, a cinematic view in people's minds,
Mm.
and it can recall. And if you get good at it, you can create melancholy type of sounds. You can make sounds that make people kind of agitated. You can make songs that make people happy, people do movements. You can see it, like, when bands are in front of crowds, they can get people to move. They can get people to react. And it's certain frequencies and beats that actually can do that. And over time, you start to realize as a producer, and it's like, okay, what's going to actually resonate, what's going to actually get somebody to want to repeat what you're doing or be affected by what you're doing. And you start to you research what other people have done, you listen to what other people have done, you start to make choices based on, like, the history of music and what you can do yourself. And so it's a kind of a it's kind of it's an art and a science. There's a
Mm.
certain level to the science of the waveforms themselves, of getting them in the right position and the right frequency and the right resolution. But then there's, like, the art of it to actually do it. So it's like kind of mixing both.
It's really interesting. Um, Yeah, it's definitely something I think, just based on our conversations today, I'd love to learn a little bit more, particularly around how it could enhance the hypnotherapy side of things even further to help people kind of get into that really ultra relaxed state that you need to then sort of, open up your subconscious mind to be able to take on these, the things that we do in hypnotherapy in terms of sort of reprogramming the beliefs and the behaviors that you want to sort of adopt, as well as sort of removing some of the perhaps negative, unwanted patterns that you have. So it's just such a fascinating area, I think, about what we can do with the
Yeah,
human
because
brain.
we with things called, like, we play with, like, there's a sound generation tools and oscillators that can create different types of noise, and we call it pink noise, white noise, brown noise. There's different levels of noise, and they can be used in combination with waveforms to create ambient tones that are relaxing. You've probably seen these sound apps that are doing that, but the synthesizers themselves can build those sounds. And when you start to realize that you can create kind of like the Enya kind of ambient, very calming type of music. And classical music has the tendency to do that, but it also can be very, like, military. It can be very
Mm,
marching, but you can do these type of forms that can cause people to fall asleep. You can cause people to kind of like a lullaby. Like, there's certain things, the aspects of the waves in the combination with the different types of noise that you can create, like the background noise when people use, like, devices to go to sleep.
mm,
These devices, so they're replicating ocean waves, or they're replicating rainstorms, and you start to realize, like, there's certain human beings react to these sounds. They're like birds or the forest. It's like you react to different things, and you say, "Oh, I can actually use that." In our music, we'll have layers, and we'll have hidden layers within a lot of our recordings that actually affect people's subconscious. Like, we have these kind of shadow tracks. They're inside of most albums that people don't realize unless you're a technician. But there's, like, stuff under the sound that you don't immediately hear, but it's there. And it's actually triggering stuff in people's brains. And the artists have figured out that if they put these shadow soundtracks into the music. It actually does that. Like Peter Gabriel was like had a big conversation on it one time when his documentary. He used to do a lot of shadow tracks in his work. It's all over his work. And it's really
Oh,
interesting that he would spend so much time putting them in.
yeah. So in his work, what was he sort of using these shadow tracks? What was his kind of intention behind them?
Well, he's a very progressive experimental artist.
Mm.
And it was he basically wanted to trigger the emotions of the lyrics and also get people to be actually want to listen and actually kind of pull them in and maybe not realize people are getting pulled into the tracks. And he is just also ways to enhance his vocal delivery by adding these like hidden vocals that actually build and layer the vocal. And so it becomes like very powerful and it can resonate and actually trigger you to really pay attention on songs like Biko and other things like Red Rain. He would put a lot of work into building the palette of all these layers to kind of try to what it actually does affect, and it causes people to like pay attention. And he had for many years not cared about being a hit musician. He was just doing a lot of progressive work, wasn't really resonating until he did like so. And then he actually said, well, you know what? This time I want to actually resonate. I'm going to work on actually connecting. And he put like the stops out. He just did everything. And he's like, I know I can actually connect if I do it this way. And he did. And I was like, wow. It's like, because he actually had the intention. No, they didn't want to just be experimental anymore. He wanted to actually get the audience to actually listen.
It's really fascinating that you can influence so much through sort of sound and music and like evoke all of these emotions and these feelings in people.
Yeah, I think you can learn from it. Like you could realize what you can do. Like as an artist, I like to take. I think music is integral into how you live. Like it's not just like being a musician. I'm passionate about it, but I believe you can use it for all kind of purposes. Like I use it to kind of outside my corporate world job. It causes me to. It's a therapeutic thing, right? It's like playing just is like catharsis. And then when people like I think people find comfort in their favorite songs for that kind of cathartic thing, and musicians find the same comfort in actually creating it. And when you start to get in touch with things that you don't normally express verbally, it's really good for nonverbal communication and being able to get in touch with parts of yourself. And when people realize what it can do, I think you can use it in trying to heal yourself if you got issues.
Mm.
Which everybody has.
That is very true. Yeah, certainly. I think music is something that I often recommend to clients in terms of, helping with mood stuff, and not just that in terms of what is it? Calming the nervous system down, particularly with singing and kind of, the vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the rest of the body. So actually through singing, through dancing, and you can start to connect back into your body, just to lift your mood, to start to feel differently and change that emotional state through some other sources rather than just turning to food. And I do use other techniques as well that helps people change their emotional state. But I think music, singing and dancing to music can really be like powerful in terms of that as well.
But it's a cool holistic point of view because like I always look at music as like it's a heart, mind, and soul and body thing. Like because when you're using your voice, there's things like people have said it actually triggers like you know things in your brain that can calm you down or not calm you down depending on what type of music you're doing. But it just is a holistic thing that has a similar effect to people taking supplements or medicine. Like it actually can change your mood. And it's not some external substance. It's actually you getting in touch with your mind, your body, your soul, and your heart. And that's a cool thing to do if you can access it. Some people run into the problem with like, well, I can't do it. I'm not a singer. It's like, well, they got to get beyond that. But it's just like another can't. It's like everybody can sing. It just depends on what you're trying. If you want to compare yourself to somebody, and people have to be kind of comfortable with like not doing the comparison. Like just do it to find your authentic voice. And I think when you start to realize that you can find an authentic voice, it's kind of like finding like, okay, you have to, do you have to rationalize you, or do you just exist, or do you like if you have to believe that you have a right to exist?
Something you just said there just made me think. One of the things that I have really had to battle over the years is this kind of need to be sort of good at everything, and just touching on singing for a moment there. And I think people can do that quite a lot, where we think we have to be good at something rather than just doing it for the love of doing it. And it doesn't matter if we're like terrible singers. Maybe it does to our neighbours who might have to endure the singing. But, and I think that is also something that often people get stuck in. It's like, well, this kind of desire and drive that I have to be good at everything, and that, attaching your worth as a human being to whether you're good at something or not. And just how nice it is to kind of lift that weight of pressure off yourself and just go, you know what, I'm just going to do it because I want to do it. I like doing it, and there's no pressure, there's no expectation. It's just for the sheer being in the moment, the mindful kind of activity of it. And I think,
yeah, just trying to find that voice is like I always point out to people, like the people who have the courage, like a Dylan. Like Dylan did not have the voice that people expect a musician to have, and he was willing to push it out there and became one of the like most iconic artists of all time, and actually inspired tons of artists to realize that I didn't have to have a 5-octave voice. I didn't have to be a Nat King Cole. I didn't have to be a Frank Sinatra. I didn't have to be a Mariah Carey. I can actually have something to say and my own unique way of saying it, and I could be a singer songwriter. And so he inspired a lot of people, along with a guy like Lou Reed, to be able to go out there and not have the perfect pitch, and that I think was very freeing and created a lot of really awesome art because people realized, oh, I'm allowed to do that. It's because somebody had the courage to go do it, like Dylan went and did it. Then you realize that you can do it. And so when I think people have to have coaches or mentors or people to tell them what's possible. And then,
yeah,
and then that helps people, because some people will always have all these like ceilings on themselves, and they'll just say, well, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. And I'm like, I always remind people is like, you like, just give me your demo, and just show me what you can do, and I'll try to make you the best version of yourself. I don't want to turn you into Taylor Swift or Beyonce or anybody else. I just want to take what you have and make it sound better, which means that I'm not trying to compare it to somebody else. I'm actually looking at what you are and making it the best version of yourself. And if people think of it in that way, then you're not limited by anything.
yeah. And I think that's, so often we get caught up in that sort of comparing ourselves to other people. And I see it a lot around sort of food issues, emotional eating, sort of judging yourself harshly, worrying about what other people are thinking about you, even though they're too busy thinking about themselves to be worried about you. But just it sometimes takes someone else just to kind of help you spot when you do this stuff, because we're all very good at sort of, creating these stories, these, we think we can mind read what other people are thinking, and that they must be thinking this thing about us. And it just takes someone to kind of say, is that really true? Do you know that? is that absolutely true? Is there any evidence for this? You know, where did this belief come from? Is there any evidence for it? Can you think of any evidence where it's not true? And just kind of putting those sort of challenging questions out there, I think can just really help people start to kind of shift that perception, start to question themselves, and just get, one of the things that I try and encourage people to do is just get curious when these thoughts come up, these feelings come up. Well, where did that come from? Why do I think like that? And it's just going back to sort of that point around becoming more aware and curious in what you're doing, what you're thinking, and the stories that you're kind of creating for yourself.
It seems like the way to maintain, long-term weight loss is to have this holistic point of view, which I've been, I kind of, that's what I like to do in my day-to-day job and in the art I do. Is the holistic thinking means like I don't get stuck in a narrow lane. Like if I decide I want to do jazz or I want to do punk or I want to do whatever, I'm not going to say, well, I can't do it. I'm going to explore, well, why couldn't I do that? Why put a limitation? And I think and why be so concerned about failure? Because, in terms of everything you do, like failure is a process in which how you learn. Like you're always like, what you have to know what you don't know. Right. I don't know these things. I can't know everything. So every day I'm going to learn. In my day-to-day job as software, we get radical changes come very fast and we have to relearn everything we do. We have to, but we don't lose from the things we learned. It's not like we have to throw it out. The logic is still there, but the tools change and we have to learn different ways of thinking. And, there's some guys that are like, oh, I'm only a mainframe guy. So they're stuck on COBOL and they never want to go outside of that. And then people are looking at blockchain and like, okay, I'm willing to look at that. I'm willing to look at cloud computing. I'm looking at all these different types of computing. And, the more you open yourself up to say, well, I'm not going to be a specialist, I'm going to try to learn as much as I can, then have a holistic point of view, because there's little pieces of everything that can apply. If you get too narrow, and that's fine, you could be a specialist, but sometimes it's good to kind of think outside the box.
Definitely. And when you were just talking about failure there, I remembered, I think it was Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, had such a really interesting perspective on this. So she grew up in a household where her dad asked them every single day at their dinner or meal times, what have you failed at today? And if they hadn't failed at something, he would almost be like disappointed, or because it meant, in their household, it meant that you hadn't really tried or you hadn't kind of put yourself out there. And I thought that, what if we all kind of grew up with that mentality, how incredible would that be in terms of being okay with failure and just they're kind of comfortable with challenging and trying different things and being open to that. So I just thought that's a really powerful shift in kind of thinking about failure, is actually what a positive thing it is, in terms of you tried and you did something different and maybe it didn't work out, but the next thing could.
Well, it's like being able to show up is like, as a podcaster, what they tell us as podcasters is most podcasts fail after like 6 or 12 episodes. People get burned out. They don't see the numbers they want. I've been doing it since 2016. My episode like 892. And the thing was like, people said, well, the first couple of years there, I wasn't really engaging a big audience, but I did it because I loved it. And just like a musician, a lot of musicians, we do it because we love it, not just because we're hitting that note with everybody. And eventually what happens is, if you get comfortable with being out there and you show up, things start to happen just because you decide to show up. If you decide to show up and stay with something, not for the goal of being like whatever, you do it because you're passionate about it. So if you get passionate about caring about your health, nothing's going to deter you, even if you make a mistake, because you're going to keep on trying to stay within that paradigm, right?
Yeah, and I think consistency sort of and determination and just kind of sticking with something and kind of, what am I trying to say here? It's that sort of not being available for it not to work out, or not accepting that this is just your reality, that you're just going to commit to the process until you figure it out. So if we take emotional eating, I decided that I was just going to figure this out one way or the other, and I just kept trying and trying and trying different things until I fixed the problem. And so I think sometimes we kind of, because we're often in search of a quick fix or the next thing, it's easy to kind of forget actually that grit and determination to say, I'm just going to stick with this and I'm going to keep going, and I'm determined to find the solution no matter what.
Well, I think it's hard too because we have a kind of like a very the society today is into like quick things. Like, you have this social media society is like, it's like a 5-minute reel, 30-second clips, got to hit a million followers, got to do this, if it doesn't do that, then you're not resonating. And everybody's like scared to not put something out that's going to be that resonate. And my point is like, well, you're never going to get there if you don't try. Like with the musicians, like some of them will have hundreds of songs in their vault that they never send to anybody. And well, how are you going to know if that was going to work or not? Because a lot of times musicians aren't that good. They don't make good choices when it comes to putting out their music. A lot of times the song they think is going to work doesn't work. And it takes like other people around them to say, hey, you need to put this one out. And a lot of times they won't do it because they're scared of it. What I find is like fear is the big problem with a lot of artists. I've talked to painters and musicians and other types of artists, and a lot of times it's like they had to have other people push them to put out something because they were scared of it. And I think the fear is so powerful. It really stops a lot of people.
Yeah, in so many different areas of life, I think it can just really hold people back. And I think sometimes people, like, I think about my own journey as well. When I wanted to change career, I was worried what other people would say. I let fear hold me back for quite a long time from kind of making that leap, because I was worried that, like, I wouldn't be able to earn as much money, I wouldn't be able to get clients, I didn't have what it takes. And so I let all of this kind of fear bubble up. And then even when I wanted to lose weight, I was too embarrassed to really admit what I wanted my body to look like. So I've always wanted to, even now I'm like, I don't know whether I can admit this, but it feels a bit ridiculous. But I always really like the fitness model physique. So I wanted sort of muscly shoulders and arms, and I was kind of like I was so far away from that kind of like goal. I didn't really admit what I wanted. And so I never kind of really reached that goal because I wasn't being honest about what it was, because I was too scared and I felt too silly. And I think, again, people kind of let all this stuff come up. And actually, it's been interesting recently. I have been on that journey. So I had my second baby last year when I turned 41. And then after about 9 weeks after he was born, I started working with some personal trainers who prep people for bodybuilding shows. And I was so embarrassed at that point, like, I'm 9 weeks postpartum, and yeah, it's you're looking in the mirror. And I was like, I've got to go and talk to these personal trainers and say, yeah, I want to do a bodybuilding program, and I wanted to do a photo shoot. And they often run them for their clients. Oh, and so the photo shoots were actually a couple of weeks ago, and I wouldn't say I'm exactly how I wanted to look, because it's always a work in progress, but I am closer than I have ever been in terms of reaching that kind of physical goal, because actually I got over my fear and said, actually, you know what, I want this, and I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to give it my best shot. And I've just had a really enjoyable process working towards this goal of doing a photo shoot. I've had the first lot of photos back, and even I was just a bit like, oh my God, I can't believe that's me. I've lost 3 stone in that journey from having my son last year. My shoulders and arms are getting more definition, and I just feel like now I did these photo shoots and it was very much a celebration of being in the best shape of my life, because I'm probably at my leanest than I ever have been. And when I say being in the best shape of my life, to me, that's more than just a physical transformation. It means emotionally, mentally, and physically strong. That's how I feel now. And these photo shoots have just been such a powerful celebration of getting to that point. But I had to kind of get over my own fears and issues around really admitting what I actually wanted and then deciding that I was going to go for it.
Well, I think that I always have to kind of point out to people, you have to actualize what your dreams are, right? So a lot of people have these dreams and they never verbalize them. They never tell anybody. And it's like and they don't even tell themselves, like looking in the mirror. So like if once you start to verbalize, and I learned as a Buddhist, like a lot of what we do is that we verbalize when we chant, like what our goals are, along with our chanting, at least the type of initial and Daishonin Buddhism I follow, is that we verbalize and actualize in our chanting what our goals and what we want to do. And it helps you focus. And when you start to actually do that, then you get closer to believing it and you get closer to the actualization of those dreams that make them real. And it's very powerful what you can do with your mind when you actually get beyond the barriers. Like you can actually get to a place where you can do it, because the 22-year-old version of myself is like, I could not talk in front of people at all. I was totally scared. I was a musician, but I never sang. I never was in the lead. There's always somebody else in the lead. I started to like, well, you know what? The only way I'm going to get anywhere is I actually have to take the mic. I actually have to get out front and get beyond that. And that was a hard thing to do, because it was like, there was a lot of problems in my head that I had to solve that were real to me, and I had to get beyond it. It's a process. It's hard to change something you're comfortable with, and I was comfortable being in the back, and to push yourself to the front is harder. And I think that's something people have to realize, like what they're scared of, and then challenge it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I often use with clients to sort of help this process is, firstly, I think, people often water down their version of goals as well. So, the conditioning goes that, we need to be realistic, and we need to kind of, and so all of this conditioning kind of ends up with these watered down goals. So I try and strip all that away, because we want to feel excited about our goals. They've got to be something that we really want to go after and chase. But if it's a bit like, oh yeah, that'd be nice, it's not got the same emotion and intent behind it. And the other aspect is, just kind of like zooming out for a moment and thinking, when I'm in my 90s, what kind of stories do I want to be telling about my life to, be it grandkids or the people around me? And am I going to feel comfortable that I didn't achieve that thing? And kind of sitting there at that point in my life saying, well, what if only I'd have just gone for it, or if only, and I think sometimes when you kind of do that exercise to sort of sit back, you realize it just helps you kind of open up to those fears and realize that actually they are holding you back. And, when we think about that end point, that's, you don't want, it just kind of helps you realize some of these kind of fears that are just unnecessary, and helps you kind of move out of your own way and kind of push past those. You might still have that feelings of fear, but you kind of now recognize that actually it's something that you're not going to let hold you back, because ultimately you want to get to that end of your life and just go, yes, I did this. It was amazing. And I was scared, but I did it anyway.
It's kind of like the stage fright that musicians have. I've been around musicians that are like brilliant, but even to this day, they still have amazing stage fright to the second they get on the stage. They just are so apprehensive about it all day until they actually get on the stage. And then they get on the stage and they transform. But it's like they're so, it's trying to get over that is like it's very hard for some people because it's like it's almost like they're two different people. The like the day-to-day version of themselves that's not on the stage, and then the stage version seems so much more comfortable of than what their day-to-day experience is with everybody else. And it's kind of like his point was like, how can you kind of mitigate that and get to a point where you're more comfortable with your full self? You know, I think that's like when the older you get, you start to get closer. You hopefully do, but it's a hard process when you see it. With people, it's like wow, it's like they're struggling, but then the world doesn't see it because they see them on stage. They don't see the rest of it, but.
Yeah, and I think it's also understanding that we can have fears and still go for it anyway. And you can, some of this, you'll always have fears around some things like you're talking about there with going on stage. But it doesn't, it's about not letting that stop you and understanding that once you've been on stage and you've got that feeling and it's over with and you look back and you're just like, wow, that was amazing. And kind of being in that sort of end point, how good that feels.
Yeah, and just trying to balance your life so that you can not have detrimental effects, because like if you're only happy when you're on stage for 2 hours a day, then you have the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So how do you get happy for the rest of the day? So that's always an issue sometimes. But it's been a great conversation. We reached our hour point. I just wanted to make sure I have your Instagram down there on scrolling, but I didn't have your website. I wasn't sure if do you have a website or people can just contact you there?
I'm currently updating my website because it's going through a little bit of a refresh at the moment. So Instagram is the best place to find me. I love chatting to people over there. And I'm going to be also launching some free resources around emotional eating coming up, hopefully next week, if I kind of get my act together this weekend.
Okay, cool. So that Instagram will be clickable when we're fully published. Right now, you can see it, Instagram.com/Carli-louan. You can, but if people on the audio, you can write that down. But if you go to YouTube or Twitch or Apple or anywhere you like to listen, because we're on a lot of platforms. So if you just look for the Family Electric Ghost podcast, this will be the latest episode in a couple hours. It'll be the most current one. And thank you. We're going to send you the landing page for your audience so they can be comfortable however they like to watch or listen. They can choose whatever platform they want. But I'd like to thank you for being on the Family Electric Ghost Show. It's been a really awesome conversation, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much for having me.